Good morning, everybody. How are you doing on this fine Thursday? All right. So, how was the exam on Tuesday? You feel okay with it? You felt prepared? Awesome. And you all hopefully got back your essays, if you were there for the exam. All right. Just sort of as a class, how do you feel about your essay grades? It may be that there's a. I think that you were in the first batch because your name was with a D, so I graded yours. So I don't know. I'll look into it. Antonio.
I didn't go to do the exam on Tuesday. Another exam. So that
Okay.
So what do I need to get my
Mr. Higgins is not here right now, so I'm not sure where he is. I think maybe he's sick, or I'm not sure. So we'll figure it out. If your essay is not in your hands, come see me or email me, and we'll be sure you get your essay. Those of you who have your essay, you feel like you have a grade that you deserved? Okay. I think that hopefully we'll see a little bit of improvement, having had a chance to do a dry run with the first essay. Lots of comments. Get more sort of familiar with the rubric as well. So hopefully that will help you if you want to do a different kind of work or perform better on the next one, you can. But overall, I think most of the grades were in the B's and the A's. So that's good, flexible on you, and it shows that you've done a good job with the material. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to think about, back actually to our reading. I had you guys read a book, Shibagoro, that he was talking about his experience, his recollections of the fall of Aizu Castle, and these kinds of things. Towards the end, one of the changes happening in Japan that none of you decided to focus on, I don't think, at least not in my bunch, was the dawn of Japanese imperialism. And I thought it would be so much fun if I could just connect that reading with today's class. So here comes an attempt to do that. On page 132, this is kind of like a quiz with no grade. So this sentence appears in Shibagoro's recollections. He recalled Sakata Takamori, who was hoping to invade a certain place, was overruled and resigned. So between recalling that page and thinking about today's readings, what country was Sakata Takamori hoping to invade? I can see your name. It's not Andrew. With a D? All right, tell me your name. Matthew. Okay. Matthew, yes. Korea. So Korea is the answer to that one. All right, so today we're going to discuss Korea. The other one I want to also, on the next page actually, talk about, along the same lines. Japanese troops had invaded a certain country, and he goes to the Ginza, the glitzy new brick building district in Tokyo. And his classmates and he are looking at a woman who's an Aborigine, which I misspelled there, sorry, Aborigine, who's on display. She's been taken captive. It's the same country as the Japanese have invaded. What country is that? No, although this country was sort of unofficially a part of China. Cash. Yes. Yes, this is Taiwan. So, Taiwan is the country we're talking about here. So I want us to figure out how we got here, right? Japan is an isolated country, right? It's close to the rest of the world. So how do we end up with an empire that by 1937 expands all the way into Burma and down to Indonesia and up into Korea and Manchuria? So it all begins, if we think about back to the closed country, I want us to poke some holes in that title. So back in the Edo period, Japan was a closed country, aside from, as you recall, Dejima, right, the island in the harbor of Nagasaki, sort of over here-ish, right, over here. But it also was not closed to the rest of Asia. So we talked about the China trade being carried on by the Portuguese and then by the Dutch. The Japanese had more direct contact with both the Taiwanese and the people of the Ryukyu Islands, which are here, and with Korea. So I want to just give some background that you haven't probably had on that in our sort of whirlwind tour of the Edo period. So the daimyo in the Edo period had a lot of autonomy, especially those that had that were able to make a lot of money off of commerce. And two daimyo in particular that did very well were, first of all, the So family on the island of Tsushima, which is here in the Korea Strait. This family was in charge of the trade with Korea. So essentially, this little island had one family carrying trade on with Korea, between Korea and Japan. Essentially, Japanese copper and silver and sulfur were being taken to Korea, and also sometimes Chinese goods also came through Korea to Japan, but they all had to pass through Tsushima. And in the other direction, the Koreans were exporting cotton and porcelain to Japan. So this was a very lucrative sort of trade interaction that was happening. It was maintained throughout the Edo period, and it grew. Probably the two wealthiest families from trade among them was the So family. So this was happening, right? And part of what's required for this to go into the function is that the Koreans have to buy into Japan as its own sort of mini China. So to go to China and trade, you have to go be part of their sphere of influence. You have to go and present gifts to the emperor or to an ambassador. You have to show that you buy into their worldview, right? And that China, as the symbol for China demonstrates, it's the middle kingdom, it's the center of the world, right? So Japan had its own ambitions to be the center of the world, even back in the Edo period. They wanted the Koreans to come to Japan as well, frequently for major events, a new shogun being named, for example, to congratulate the shogun, bring gifts, and show goodwill. So this was happening, and this maintains the trade between Korea and Japan. Okay. Other important kingdom that's involved in the same kind of trade relationship is Ryukyu. Today, it is Japan and Okinawa. And in this case, it was the family Shimazu down in Kagoshima who had the mandate to trade with the islanders of Ryukyu. It's kind of far from Japan, as you can see on the map, Ryukyu, right? It's not next door. But this was essentially Japan's window on Southeast Asia and also on some Chinese goods coming from Fuzhou and sort of Southeast China. So Chinese goods come from Southeast Asia as well. This is a list here. A lot of metallurgy, things being transported, a lot of luxury items as well as medicines and textiles are coming from through this trade through the islands of Ryukyu. And this is actually it's a kingdom. They have their own king. They have a capital. They have a castle, right? It's not a part of Japan at all. But as you can imagine, through these ties over 2 centuries to Japan, they developed stronger and stronger links to Japan. Antonio?
Do you know how long it would take?
I think it was about 2 or 3 days. It wasn't that far, but Japanese navigation was not their strong suit, and so it was a perilous voyage. But yeah, it wasn't that far in terms of the time. I think about 3 days. What I've read a few places. So the missions. So the kingdom of Ryukyu also has to be part of Japan's sphere of influence. They have to go and buy in. They have to bring presents as well to sort of curry favor with the Japanese, and they do so. This is a print from the 1830s of a mission from Ryukyu coming to celebrate. I think it was a recent shogunal accession, naming a new shogun. So they're well dressed. They come in large groups, and this is another one back in the 1700s. This is sort of traditional Ryukyuan costume on display. So it was kind of a chance for Japan to see the other, the other to see Japan up close. This is the same image, but the other half of the image with the ambassador seated up high. So I mentioned these two external parts of Japan's sphere of influence because both have ties to Japan, and they're both going to be called upon throughout the Edo period to maintain these ties and to see Japan as their center, or at least to sort of pay lip service to that idea. So as we get into Japan's modern imperial ambitions, these ties are sort of a foundation for imperial aspirations as well, expansion. And last I want to mention Hokkaido, which is a bit more complicated, but also much closer. So in the history of Japan, Hokkaido has been a faraway country sort of in the far north, a no man's land, so to speak. Ezo should have a long macron over the O, but it was a country that was far away. People living on Ezo, what becomes Hokkaido, were not Japanese ethnically, and sometimes, because they were sometimes very fierce and good at fighting, they would create havoc for the Japanese along Japan's Honshu's northern borders. So they were a presence that was well known. They sort of creeped down in northern Honshu, and part of the unification of Japan back in the sort of 700s and 800s involves pushing these people back out of Honshu towards Ezo. But anyway, it's far away. Only as Japan begins as population to grow in the Edo period do we see a massive expansion and look for more land, right? And Ezo is there. It's not that far away, in fact, in terms of getting there by land. And so this becomes part of Japan's expansion, even before imperialism is called that in Japan. The people living in Ezo were the Ainu. The Ainu, as you can see here, they have ethnically more in common with Russians than with Japanese. They speak a different language. They have a different cosmology. It's not a Japanese culture at all. It appears that these people had been in parts of Japan going back to the Jomon period, so way back to before the Common Era. They are just a different kind of people. They have a different lifestyle, a different diet, etc. And they're very hairy. Dark hair or red hair typified the Ainu. As Japan began to expand, and as the mining industry in particular becomes more connected through Osaka and Edo, the search for more land for farming grows a bit, but the biggest growth are in two areas of fishing and in mining. And Ezo is just sort of there for the taking. It's not highly populated. There are probably a few 100,000 Ainu living on this big island. Japanese were living, several million on a relatively small, right, and arable space in their part of Japan. So expansion, I think, in some ways was probably inevitable, at least the clash between the two. So Japanese gold and copper mining expands to the north. The shogun gives out special charters for companies. They have their own mine as well that they open in Matsumai in the far north of Japan, and they're allowed to go and trade with the Ainu and to establish and settle and mine in the very southern part of Hokkaido or Ezo. And this grows over a century and a half or so, and so that mining and copper and gold mining do come into their own as industries in Hokkaido. But the biggest issue, I think, has more to do. I mean, mining has a lot of negative impacts, right? Runoff from mining, especially in the 1800s, has involved a lot of water, right? To take away the water is required for lots of things in mining, but it's partially required because when you mine, you have to go through water to get to the rocks. and it has to go somewhere, right? So all this water goes in rivers, and it creates issues for health of people living nearby. But the biggest issue for the Ainu is fishing. The Ainu are very reliant upon fish for their livelihood. They're hunters more than they are farmers. And so again, the water wasn't the biggest issue. The biggest issue was fishing. The Japanese encroach upon those rights with a few new inventions. I wonder, something's missing. Yeah, here we go. So the Japanese are more efficient at fishing than the Ainu. And they develop more efficient technologies, which they bring to Hokkaido or Ezo, and they use. The gill net, which there's space there, looks like this. It's a simple net that is able to float and stay stationary as fish flow into it. Is one of the innovations the Japanese bring. And the other is the pound trap, which essentially just leads fish into a larger netted space. These are not super difficult to build. Japanese settlers have materials. They have some shogunate money as well to pay for this. The shogun actually also they encourage expansion with grants of money and materials to go to Ezo. So this expansion, these technologies quickly overtake population, also the fishing resources in Ezo. So to make a long story longer, the population of Ezo, the Ainu people cannot at all, they're not able to successfully compete with the Japanese, and they begin to lose their fishing holes, their fishing livelihood. And in the at the moment of the restoration, the new government officially would like to make Hokkaido part of Japan. There was actually a war in the 1660s that the Ainu chieftains fought and lost to try and resist colonization that was happening slowly. But by the 1860s, there was no formal any sort of blockage between Japan and expanding into Hokkaido. So they call it Hokkaido. After the Meiji Restoration, it becomes part of Japan officially. People continue to suffer because right after they do this, they also divide the land into parcels that are private property, and as a culture that has relied upon commonable resources. They have no proof of land deeds. They have no concept of what this is supposed to mean. So the Japanese are able to go in and buy these private lots and settle and push the Ainu out. It's actually a very sad story that has been written about a lot in terms of comparison with the American Indian history as well. So by 1869, Japan includes Hokkaido, and a decade later it will also include Okinawa, the former kingdom of Ryukyu. So now let's talk about what's happening in Japan itself. What's happening in Japan itself as it expands is that there's a larger desire for expansion. We talked about resources being sometimes limited, right, or being exhausted, but there's also a desire to use resources, manpower, in ways that are productive and efficient as well. So let's talk about the Shimazu down here in Satsuma. So the Meiji Restoration is very good for Satsuma, and that they're able to acquire, as you'll recall, a lot of foreign technology, foreign weapons. They've had experience with Westerns before, and so they also have some, Western knowledge is quite prevalent in Kagoshima. And the leaders of the Meiji Restoration, among them, the Satsuma samurai are among the top, handful of leaders who are leading things in the new government. But Satsuma has also quite strong traditional ties to its history, the culture of the samurai culture, right? And they begin, these same middle-level samurai who become sort of vice prime ministers and things in the new government, become worried about over-Westernization. Too much of the West, losing Japan's traditional culture. And the Satsuma samurai, kind of like those in Aizu, they were raised, for 2 centuries with very strong ideas about manhood and about bravery and about virtue, and these things are hard to just overnight erase, despite the rush to westernize. So they call upon these leaders, in particular Sega Takamori, on the right there, to intervene and maintain a Japaneseness, right, a Japanese national identity. This was also where they were, for example, trying to purify Japan of the Chineseness, and they persecuted Buddhists, if you recall, in the 1860s. So all these things are still very present, despite Japan's westernization, led by, in part, Satsuma leaders. Another issue is the samurai Satsuma want to stay samurai. The new government is trying very quickly to turn everyone into citizens and into commoners, unless they are part of the very, very elite, right, the daimyo or members of the imperial court, who get a title of peer or nobility, aristocracy. So as you can imagine, the samurai Satsuma, who were on the winning side, in fact, of the restoration, are feeling a little bit gypped. We don't get to be samurai anymore. What does this mean, right? And with the creation of a new army of conscripts, the whole country is going to be holding rifles and fighting for Japan. What are our skills worth? What is our history worth? They have these important questions. In 1872 and 73, there is the imperial family is waiting for Korea to send an embassy, right, as a mission, which they're supposed to do, if you'll recall, right, Japan's world order. It requires its trade partners to come and visit and bring gifts on big events. This Meiji Restoration is a pretty big event, right, the imperial restoration, but no one from Korea comes. There's no one comes, and they even replied to letters of asking them to come, saying that they're not going to come. I'm not sure of all the reasons behind that, but part of it has to do with their belief that this was not a fully legitimate takeover of power. And also, there's also some internal issues between different factions in the Korean royal family. So when this doesn't happen, Sega Takamori, who is, what is his title now? He's on the Privy Council. Anyway, he knows what's happening, and he sees an opportunity here to sort of reinstate Japan's ties to Korea, or make them stronger, but also to put all these samurai in Satsuma to good use who are frustrated. His goal is essentially to provoke war with Korea, and then when Korea responds, to go punish Korea, and then to colonize Korea if necessary. That is his goal. And he's thinking about, this is called the Seikaneron, which more or less is the debate about making Korea Japan's enemy. The samurai as a class, right, have, between 1871 and 1876, will lose all of their privileges. They'll lose their swords. They'll lose their top knots. Have you guys seen the movie The Last Samurai? Yeah. The scene where the son of the figure who more or less is designed sort of after Sega Takamori has his top knot cut off in the street in the new, I think probably actually in Yokohama. But anyway, he has this happen to him, and it's a very moving scene. If you avoid this kind of this Tom Cruise movie, I understand, but it's really a good movie, especially that scene. It illustrates what's happening to the samurai class. They're frustrated. They don't have a job. Their skills are no longer useful. As you saw with Shibagoro, right, they're confused as to their future in this new Japan, and they're restless. But they also know how to fight, right? And so there's a danger of them perhaps even creating a revolution in Japan to take back some of their authority. Who knows, right? Anything goes here. So to diffuse this possible situation, I think the idea of Takamori to put these samurai to use, it makes a lot of sense. He makes this proposition to do this, and this actually lasts for a few years. It is in the end rejected, and we'll have a slide on that at the end, but that's his idea. In the meantime, the same samurai from Kagoshima get a small break. I think about 78 or so Okinawan fishermen the year before are they travel to Taiwan, and Taiwanese Aborigines, who are Taiwan has Chinese residents who many of whom came along with at the end of the Ming Dynasty to Taiwan, as well as Aborigines who are not Chinese, ethnically Chinese, Han Chinese, I should say. They attacked these Okinawan sailors and they massacred them. Okinawa had been part of Japan for 3 years, right? But this was a big affront to Japan, or so the papers said, so the government said, and so the samurai from Satsuma, who had been in charge of the Okinawan connection throughout the Edo period, took it upon themselves to go and punish Taiwan for killing Japanese sailors. So the brother of Saigo Takamori actually is the leader of this group, and they go and they take boats and they attack Taiwan. They punish the Taiwanese. They start and win a very short war. This finalizes Japan's claim to Okinawa as part of Japan. There's no doubt about that anywhere in terms of China's possible claims on Okinawa. And it also gets the Chinese also pay a very large indemnity for the loss of lives of these sailors. So this is a big moment for Japan in their national policy. Taiwan will then sort of be back in Japan's largest sphere of influence. But thinking about Okinawa, the king of Okinawa, Shotai, is asked very politely to abdicate, become part of Japanese noble class. He gets to go to the capital and live there if he wants to, which he's forced to do that. And this officially pulls Okinawa into Japan, and they lose their leader. Back to Saigo Takamori, his own compatriot from Satsuma, Okubo, he's against this, right? The idea of Japan colonizing Korea. It's too early. It's too dangerous. He rejects this plan, and at this point in time, Okubo is one of the people who has the emperor's ear, and the emperor does not contradict him, and so this mission never happens. And this leads to the decision of Saigo Takamori to resign from the Council of State, the Daijo, of which he's a part, and then he goes back to Satsuma and plots a rebellion. He opens a military school to reinstill the values of Satsuma and the samurai of Satsuma, and he's sort of just waiting. And actually, samurai from other parts of Kyushu, who are also frustrated and worried, they flock to this school, so that by 1876 or so, he does have an army. And when it becomes clear that there will be no after the sort of finishing blow, right, to take away samurai status in 76, they plot a rebellion. The rebellion marches with several tens of thousands of soldiers, samurai soldiers, up through Kyushu, but the imperial forces descend and they meet in Kumamoto, and the imperial forces defeat the forces of Satsuma and other allied samurai. The scene in The Last Samurai where there's like the howitzer going off and the samurai are on their horses, I mean that's horsewash. We have samurai, but they have guns. They are fighting. Just had fewer guns. They weren't trained. They weren't working in the modern military formation, so they lost. But this battle was not a battle between firearms and samurai shooting bows and arrows, as the film depicts. What does happen, and this is part of what frustrates Saigo Takamori, is the Japanese have a different idea. And they actually leave him out of this. He's in Kagoshima. He's not part of this new plan. The new plan is to send a Japanese warship, the Unyo, into the Kangwa, which is an island just off of the coast of Korea, from which the Koreans have killed several countries, members who have tried to enter Korea, Westerners in particular from Russia and the United States. So the Japanese send a warship knowing that this is going to lead to an attack. When the Unyo was attacked, the Japanese used this as an excuse to then invade, to threaten to invade Korea. This is we call gumboat diplomacy. Does this ring a bell at all? Like, so when did the Japanese see this kind of strategy at work in Japan? David? Yeah. Matthew Perry. Right? So this is textbook, copying Matthew, coming to Matthew Perry's trip to Japan in '53. In this case, the Japanese quickly overwhelm the Koreans who give up and surrender, and they sign a treaty. And the treaty is the Treaty of Kangwa, which is a really big deal because it officially opens Korea to trade with the world. So while the West opened Japan, Japan opened Korea, right? But using the same tactics. In theory, at the beginning, the goal of this treaty was to help uplift Korea, right? To bring Korea on par with Japanese civilization, to have Japan have a better trading partner. But the treaty is not as punitive or as sort of unequal as the U.S. and Japan's initial Treaty of Amity and Commerce. But it does give the Japanese to settle in port cities. They bring observers from the Japanese court to Korea to oversee, advise, help, guide, right? All these very positive words. And they forced Korea to open 3 ports to trade, including Incheon and Busan. But Korea does have sovereign rights. Right? It's a sovereign country. There was some confusion, right? Because Korea has always been China's little brother, and they have relied upon China often for protection as well as other forms of influence and help. So Japan officially severs Korea's official ties, right? Their ties with China with this treaty in '76. As you can imagine, from the beginning, this is a worry for China. China has seen firsthand, right, Western imperialism, what it looks like, and Japanese imperialism looks very similar. They see this as a sort of a road that will not lead to a good outcome for China. And meanwhile, in Korea, there are those who are embracing Japanese imperialism as a way to uplift Korea. Since we assume that colonization is always sort of resisted or fought against, and it's not always the case, right? When, as we'll see maybe in this class we have time, the Indians are actually cheering for Japan as they're colonizing other countries initially, right? So colonization it's a force that has mixed responses, and the most advanced the elite members of the Yangban class or the elite class, the educated literati class, are looking towards the West as a way to improve their country, and they see Japan as sort of the bridge to that. So a group led by Kim Il-kyun and his Gyalpa, or his Party of Enlightenment, embraces these changes initially, right? And they welcome these Japanese advisors. They open Japan, they open Korea to Westerners who come in and who open missionary schools and all these kinds of things. So it's really a very open moment for Korea. So that's happening. But in the background, China and Japan are they're kind of eyeing each other. China is worried about losing its nearest trade partner in the north, and what that might mean for China as a whole. And Japan is looking at the continent. Japan is also worried about what some have called the dagger of Korea, from the continent into the heart of Japan, right? That the Russians or Chinese could just at some point decide to run over through Korea into Japan, take over Japan. So there is this mutual distrust. Just to be clear on things, the Prime Minister Hirohumi and the Foreign Minister Li Hongzhang of China, they meet near Beijing, and they established the Li-Ito Convention, which essentially is a promise that neither country will send troops into Korea without telling the other country first. If Korea needs help, of course, Japan will be there, but we'll have to notify China first, and vice versa for China. This agreement is tested during the Donggak Rebellion, a peasant rebellion led by a few members of the literati class, Choi Jae-yu and others. It's a peasant rebellion that is essentially trying to make sense of all this change that's happening. Right, Korea was a country with a very small and very separate elite class, with mostly ties with the royal family, and then the rest were all peasants, and there were also some slaves. So this society is all of a sudden open to the West, flooded with new ideas, but also destabilized and angry at the Yangban class for holding Korea back, but unsure sort of the way forward. So to sort of make a really big rebellion that leads to 300,000 deaths into a small sort of soundbite, this revolution is about trying to reestablish Korean identity, and it's about trying to merge Korean traditional religion with independence and a more forward-looking country, sort of outlook on the country. So this rebellion, it takes over, right, and it spreads throughout the country. Korea, the new government is really just trying to find its feet. They need help to put down this rebellion, this peasant rebellion. They're unable themselves to do it, so they ask for help. The closest help is from China, and so China does go to assist in putting down the Donggak rebellion. But as you can imagine, the Japanese are not happy with this. There's still debate as to what extent the Chinese notified the Japanese they were going to come help the Koreans. But the reality is that the military force from China did go and help put down the rebellion, which is successfully quelled. But the outcome is that Japan announces the decision to go to war against China. This is a cartoon, I think from Punch magazine, so a popular British publication of the time, one of the top sort of most widely distributed weeklies of the time. What do you see happening here in this, Johnny?
Like the small country of Japan is taking down the big powerhouse that's China.
Yeah, so China is a giant, right? The West has come to recognize, China for its size, in terms of its landmass, but also the population, and the culture of China also is the culture that dominates, right, the East, and so the West sees this victory of Japan. Japan defeats, they defeat China in a little less than a year of fighting. Japan's imperial forces are, and the conscript army is tested with their Western advisors. They've done a good job, right, and they're able to defeat China. And this defeat, unlike future wars, sometimes it's a real defeat. China loses this war. This war was mostly fought in Korea. or large fought in Korea, and so it leaves in its wake a trail of Korean deaths. Many Koreans fought with the Chinese as well. So this does not, this war about China and Japan's ties, their own sort of conflict really was about Korea, and it really affected most Korea. Korea was crippled from this fighting. The end result is that, and these are some battles here, but I'm not going on that today, was that Korea is affirmed as an independent country. It's not a Chinese protectorate or anything like that. And in exchange for sort of, in repayment for Japan's, so Japan won a war, they get an indemnity. China admits to wrongdoing, right, in starting this war or leading to this war, and they pay the indemnity. But they also cede to Japan Liaodong Peninsula, which is Manchuria, more or less, and Taiwan. So Taiwan in 1895 becomes Japan's first sort of real colony, right, which it had no settlement or true ties before. So this is a big deal. And China has to open 4 more treaty ports. But Taiwan is the big deal here, I think I should mention. So the Japanese government in Taiwan is the government. So it's a colonial government in Taiwan. They codify things. They count people with census. They count the land sizes, those kinds of things. They institute Japanese language in the schools. They use a lot of police measures to create obedience, but at the same time they also bring a lot of new financial investment. Bank of Taiwan is created, which is a Japanese colonial bank, which finances the creation of sort of a sugar empire and a rice empire, and tea and camphor to a smaller extent empire in Taiwan that really goes back to Japan. So Japan now can get rice from its rice colony, Taiwan. The roads, railways, and harbors are maintained by this new government, which connects people. The postal service, telegraph are also they're also installed, and so these changes, they dramatically change life of people living in Taiwan, and many actually embrace this. So what I'll say lastly is that we'll talk actually more, I think, next class about Japan's continuing in greater role in Korea. But the end result is that Japan colonizes Korea. First, it's a protectorate in 1905, and a colony in 1910, and it colonizes Korea until 1945. Tomorrow, with Mr. Higgins, we'll be discussing colonization, and you're going to read some things that describe colonization, both how Japanese see it as well as how Koreans experienced it, very briefly. So read those documents. It's not a lot of reading, I don't think. And then tomorrow, you'll be doing a debate. So you're asking me to actually, the question is, was colonization good for Korea? Use your resources to prepare both sides of the debate, and then Mr. Higgins will give you a side to debate on in class tomorrow. Okay? All right. Thank you.